Hey, this is Kirill Nikolai from Still Light, and you're listening to the Literati podcast.
Thanks for joining us on the show today. This is episode 32 of the Literati Records podcast. I'm your host, Marcus, and I want to thank you once again for choosing to support independent music. I'm really excited to get to today's interview, so I will keep the announcements brief. If you have not gotten entered in our $100 monthly cash giveaway, get over to our website at www.literatirecords.com and sign up for our mailing list. This will get you entered. While you're there, be sure to connect with us via the social media links at the top of our page. My guest on the show today is Kirill Nikolai, the creative mind behind the psych folk project Still Light. With an eclectic blend of acoustic instruments and subtle electronic effects, Still Light creates lush aural backdrops in which to house stirring and sometimes tragic folk tales. It is my pleasure to bring you Kirill Nikolai of Still Light. Hey, my guest on the show today is Kirill Nikolai of Still Light. How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. Well, how did the project begin for those who may not be familiar with Still Light?
It began sort of in a strange way, I guess, in the sense that I had some music, just little bits and pieces of tracks that I didn't really have any plan for, and I don't remember exactly how, but somehow I started talking a little bit online with this artist out of London, Sand Snowman, who does, very lovely psychedelic kind of old school folk music, and we had a lot of influences and things in common, and I don't remember, what kind of drove me to do it, but I sent him a couple of these tracks that were in progress and asked if he would be interested. He's a little bit like me, where he likes to dabble in all kinds of instruments on his own track, so he plays just about every instrument you hear on his music, and so I sent these sort of semi-complete tracks to him and asked if he might be interested in contributing whatever kinds of sounds he wanted to come up with for them, and sure enough he did, and that was just sort of the impetus to put this together into some kind of a cohesive whole. And then the other piece of the first album that was released under the Still Light name was Lucy Hague, and she is somebody that I had met online from a much longer time before that on a website called B Music, which is a very old free SoundClick kind of a site. And so sort of the same thing. I sent her tracks that me and Sand were working on at the time and asked her if she would love to sing on it with me. So their contributions were really kind of vital to the project as a whole getting off the ground.
The resulting album from that was Lithing, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
What influences shape the music of Still Light?
It depends a little bit on which piece and which album, of which there are only two, I guess, but I think I sort of love the idea of a really cohesive kind of story, and maybe not necessarily like a concept album in the prog rock sort of sense, but more of an album that tells a story with very related themes across the different songs. And so I think a lot of that influence comes from literary and film and movies, that kind of influence. I really love like soundtrack music for films and things like that. So I think just cohesive themes and stories portrayed in different ways across an album's length of music. That sounds like a very vague description of influences, but yeah, that along with using traditional instruments in somewhat non-traditional ways, like acoustic folk instruments, layered and used in ways to build atmospheres and make things a little bit more textural and varied than the traditional kinds of folk songs that people do with those instruments. So,
do you have when you're recording a project, do you have a preference for digital versus analog, or do you just use a combination of whatever you have available at the time?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think, like, philosophically and on an aesthetic level, I love analog. Will Klingenmeier, who played on this last Still Light record, he's a very good friend of mine and has been for a very long time, and he actually had, some of the tracks were recorded with him and in his studio, and he even had an analog setup, and although we never used any of the tracks for anything that's been released that was recorded on his analog tape setup, it was a lot of fun to work with that, and to the point where I, at one point, had bought my own, sort of assembled my own analog setup, and I just started using it, and it's just, I think people sort of underappreciate just how much more work it takes to create and record and produce music using tape and a real analog mixer and things like that. And
sure.
It was having sort of been exposed to the digital world before analog. It was really, really, really challenging for me to adapt to doing things with the analog stuff, even though I just had such a strong magnetic pull towards it on an aesthetic level. But I ended up not ever really picking that up seriously, because it just, in the time that it would take me to do one song on a tape machine the way that I wanted it done, I could have, produced, 2 albums probably in the digital world, just because of how much easier it is and how much more efficiently one can work with digital these days. So I think up to this point, just about everything's been digital. Yeah, I've dabbled, and it's a lot of fun, but given how much time I have to spend on music, this was never really a practical solution, as much as I love the medium and working with that.
Gotcha. Now, how does your focus change when you're planning to take the music, from the studio and the recording phase to the stage?
I don't think that I ever really was cut out for being a live or a stage musician. I really thrive in producing, recording, and writing, I think. So it's been interesting trying to adapt some of this music that was sort of inherently written and produced in the studio and try to recreate it with real musicians live. And so it was a bit of a challenge, but I think the biggest thing about it is that there's a bit of pressure when you put together a group of musicians and you come up with a set list. There's a bit of pressure to get the most out of playing a single set. And it's just not, like in terms of just playing more shows than one for every set that you put together.
Right.
And to play around and tour and gig a little bit more regularly. And to me, I think the music is very emotionally draining and sort of exhausting. It sounds its most correct when it's played with kind of a full emotional commitment to it, and it would be too exhausting to play the same kind of performance with that kind of music in mind more than, once every few weeks. And
right.
So there was a lot of sort of one-off shows when we would play live. And that was cool because it was like we never played really the same concert twice in some ways, even though it would be the same kinds of songs. We would sort of compose new pieces to go in between the transitions between songs to sort of create a cohesive, hopefully somewhat cinematic experience. But, it depends so much on the venue and the setting and the audience of whether that sort of thing clicks or not. And unfortunately, I think it worked less times, or it didn't work more times than it did.
Gotcha.
So it was just a really exhausting enterprise. But
there's so many variables that go into the live show that it's really probably hard to recreate some of the emotional impact that you were talking about that still life music has.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think you said it.
Your last two releases came out on vinyl label Tone Float, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And how did you become associated with Tone Float Records?
Well, I knew of the label because they've released some of my favorite music over the years, and so particularly there's a band called The Use of Ashes that they have released their music almost exclusively through Tone Float since the beginning, and they're this really obscure psychedelic kind of psychedelic folk rock band that is really amazing. And so I think when this album was completed, also Sand had just released something with Tone Float, and because of that kind of connection, I thought it would be a logical connection with Still Light to see if Charles from Tone Float might be interested in releasing some of that, and he enjoyed the music, and it just made sense. The partnership with Tone Float just made sense from the beginning, and so that's how that happened. A bit serendipitous, I guess, but
hey, that's all right. We'll take that.
Yeah.
So your releases on Tone Float were Lighting, which we spoke of earlier, and also the Rosarium album.
Mhm.
And where can people pick up those albums? Off the Tone Float website, or do you have? Because I guess we should mention that Tone Float is not a U.S. label, correct?
Right. Yeah, Tone Float operates out of the Netherlands. Yeah.
And is there a local U.S. distributor people can get that music through?
I don't know if there's a local distributor. I know that Tone Float works with some distribution in Europe, across Europe. So there's places to get it. I mean, the number one spot to get it if you're in Europe is just from Tone Float directly. And then, we have a website with a web shop up. Unfortunately, I don't have as much time as I wish I did to update it with the newest release, which I have some copies of. So people can email me to buy some copies of that if they're in the U.S. But there's also some websites online of various distributors that I think carry a lot of the Tone Float releases. So I think the internet nowadays is a good place to get things that maybe aren't distributed in the U.S. at all.
Great. Well, do you have any upcoming releases in the works?
Yes, we do actually. There's a very different kind of Still Light album that should be coming out sometime this year, hopefully. Actually, not through Tone Float. This time we're working with a small English label called Fluid Audio, and they do really, really great sort of limited edition releases of experimental, everything from avant-garde types of releases to sort of modern classical music. And this third Still Light album is actually going to be quite a bit different and unique compared to the last two in that it's all instrumental and it's just one long track that's highly influenced by jazz music, a little bit of post-rock influence, and drone and experimental kinds of music influences. But it's just going to be a very self-indulgent kind of release. But at the same time, it's probably one of my favorite things that I've ever done. And I worked really closely with Will Klingenmeier on that album, and a lot went into that. It was quite an interesting experience creating that. So
I know how much of yourself that you put into your music, so I'm sure that's going to be an incredible piece of music, and I can't wait to hear that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's exciting. And actually, this one was a little bit I mean, this album is going to be just as, I think, as emotional, if not maybe the most emotional album that we've done, but it's just a little bit more mature and interesting to me, I think. And it was also much more of a collaborative experience working with Will and some of the other musicians on the record. There's also a really great performance on the record by Dennis Swanson, who is one of the guitar players for another band that I played with in Colorado called Orbit Service. Just everything about the recording process of this album that will hopefully be out soon was just very different and cathartic and kind of really cool to be a part of. So yeah, it'll be exciting to get that out.
Well, Kirill, I want to thank you for taking the time to get us caught up on what's happening with Still Light, and we will be looking for that new album. It sounds incredible.
Great, yeah. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
You're welcome.
It was fun.
They tied blue ribbons around your bed, and the sound of summer led the procession along, and the hearse drove cold arms to the grave. But I swear they felt the same as the first day spring came. collected in the trees to ride me for my shame, and the hearts left me the soul twisted air and the blackest clothes I wear. Consecrate the sun, resurrect thee. Draining waterway dry, bringing the soul back home. And I buried flowers that died in the garden among withered roots, overgrown. Where the restless old bones never tire, and the embers still glow in your fire. Past the river, leaves are all falling away, and the swallows grow still when the town church bell sways. Lifting stone from the ground, laying out infant seats bare. Communion took all but the sound of the woodlands that seemed to have been always there. Where the restless old bones never tire, and the embers still glow in your fire. Past the river, there's sunken roots when I'm not here. Is it your lost form? A shape leaves ever clear to the old trees show. There's sunken roots when I'm not here. Is it your lost form? The shape leaves ever clear